Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the new session on this HBP Tea Slides. We are very happy to have you all connected and joining us for this nice session in which we're going to discuss a little bit about how to access computing resources for your research. So this is a little bit different to other talks that we've had in the past. And I hope that you enjoy it very much. So first of all, remember that the Tea Slides sessions are meant to give the opportunity to young researchers to expose their work and also talk about different aspects of your research or things that you are interested on and new avenues for collaboration and networking. And well, during this session, one thing that is very important is that please use the Q&A button in your interface in order to post your questions to our speakers. And we will have two sessions of two talks of 10 minutes. And then we will have a 10-minute session with some questions and answers so we can address your comments. If you want to also interact with our speakers, you can also use the raise your hand button in the interface to do that. And we will try to make the discussion nice and flexible and relaxed. So that's the idea, that we have some fun time together. These sessions are being recorded and you will be able to find them in the portal from the HBP Education Program website. And after this session, you can continue talking with other colleagues, networking and discussing with our presenters, also on the Slack channel that probably you already are part of, or if not, you can find the link in the education website. So now it is my pleasure to introduce the two presenters of this session. Both of them are my dear colleagues. Both of them work at the Forschungszentrum Jülich in the Simulation Lab Neuroscience. And our first speaker today is Lührs. She is a computer scientist by training, and she has been working in the HBP almost from the very beginning. She is currently managing work package 6 in the Human Brain Project, which deals with the eBrains computing services. And she is also part of the management team of the IC project, which builds the Phoenix infrastructure. And she's going to tell us all about how to get access to this infrastructure in just a minute. She also coordinates the allocation process of these resources. So she knows all the details about how to apply for these resources and which are available, when, and who to talk to in order to get access to that. Our second speaker today is Alper, and he is gonna talk to us about his experience accessing these resources. Alper is doing his PhD in Aachen and in combination with Jülich. And he does lots of research on learning on spiking neural networks. And of course, this requires some computational intensive simulations. So he's going to tell us a little bit about how he applied for resources and what is the general strategy to do this, so that you can apply this to your own research as well. So without further delay, I give the floor to Anna.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the nice introduction, Sandra. You've basically said everything I would have said myself. That's awesome. So you should see my screen now. I would like to very briefly start talking about the Phoenix infrastructure for those who have never heard of it before. So the Phoenix research infrastructure is not just a network with supercomputers, as some people might think, but this infrastructure also offers other types of resources to HBP people, but basically to any scientist in Europe. So in addition to scalable and interactive computing services, that is what we could call supercomputing resources here, We also offer virtual machine services, which could, for example, be used to host an image service for a community, and also storage, so archival and active data repositories. These 5 types of resources are offered at 5 sites. Not every site offers everything, but it's 5 sites offering 5 different types of services. What is available at which site is best to be found on the Phoenix website, which is on this slide. And I can also post it in the chat later. 2 of the sites, Barcelona Supercomputing Centre in Spain and Cinica in Italy, are about to make their resources available in the next weeks. So let's start with most important things first. Who can apply for using these resources? The good news is basically everyone. So if you work in Europe, even if you're only a PhD student, you can already apply. If you apply for supercomputer, HPC resources through other calls, there might be restrictions that you have to be a PI or you have to have a PhD. So these restrictions are not in place for Phoenix resources. So if you're a PhD student at for example, an HBP partner institution, but even elsewhere in Europe, you're allowed to apply, and you don't have to pay for using the resources. So important to know before I start explaining a bit about the process, how you get resources, is that the European Commission and the member states have paid to build this infrastructure so that the scientists using it don't have to pay. There is a process in place which ensures that it's used in a reasonable way and in a scientifically good way. So you basically have to prove scientific excellence, which doesn't mean you have to be like the top 0.5% in your field, but there should be a reasonable scientific case that you would like to work on using the resources. If you need any help with your application, you have any questions which can't be answered here, you can always contact my colleagues and myself in the ICI Project Management Office. ICI is the project that builds the Phoenix infrastructure at the moment. And of course, there's also a lot more information on the Phoenix website. So let's look at the process. That's you. Let's say you and a colleague, for example, Alper. And Alper would like to apply for resources. Alper found the proposal template on the HBP website. He filled everything in, talked maybe to us first to answer some questions, and then he submits the proposal to us, the Project Management Office of the IC project. We quickly check if everything is there, make sure that he hasn't missed anything important. And then we send his proposal to experts of the IC site, which he would like to use. So if Alper applies for resources in Jülich, we are going to send his proposal to someone in Jülich to look if what he plans to do is technically feasible. If Alper, for example, writes he would like to use a special library which is not installed at our site, and our technicians say, we can't install this because it's impossible to install some of the requirements, then we would get back to Alper. But this first check is really only on this technical level. This step usually takes up to 2 weeks. Then we, as the management office, send the proposal and the technical assessment to the eBrains Infrastructure Allocation Committee. That is a group of currently 4 members of the Human Brain Project, which either directly decide if a proposal can get resources, or they prepare the decision proposal for another governance body, which I will talk about later. If you only ask for a small amount of resources, so if Alper, for example, would only like to use a virtual machine and he needs some storage and only very little interactive computing resources, then this IAC can directly decide, yep, technically it's possible what he wants to do, it sounds reasonable, so you get the resources. But if Alper has more ambitious, bigger plans and he needs a lot of resources, for example, a lot of storage or a lot of computing resources or both, then the IAC sends the proposal to science experts, both from inside and outside the HBP, which review the proposal again, now focusing on the scientific aspects. So if what Alper plans to do is scientifically reasonable and will move the research area forward, in a sense. They also check to a certain extent if it somehow contributes to the goals of the HBP. let's assume that the science experts have said, yep, Alper has a great idea. Sounds good. The technical experts said, yep, it's technically possible. Then the IAC will prepare a decision proposal in which they write, yep, good idea, great project, we support this. And then we as the IAC Project Management Office send this proposal together with all the documentation, so the scientific and technical assessments and the decision proposal from the IAC to the HBP Directorate, another governance body in the Human Brain Project. And this governance body then makes the final decision. They usually follow the suggestion of the IAC. And if we get the okay from either the IAC or the directorate that the project can start, we inform Alper and say, hey Alper, good news, your project has been approved. We inform the site or sites where Alper would like to get resources and tell them this project has been approved. Please make sure that Alper and his colleagues get access. And then the site usually gets in contact with the applicant again and tells all the nitty-gritty details about what you need to do to get an account. Maybe you have to still sign some paperwork like a usage agreement, but this is really just the usual stuff which everyone who uses resources at the site has to do. So this is really just formalities. So it's a relatively large, complex process, which also shows why it makes sense if you apply for resources the first time to maybe check with a colleague or with us before you submit your proposal if you're unsure about certain things. Because if a proposal is complete and comprehensive, it's more likely to directly get through than if something is missing. If you, for example, misunderstand what's requested in a certain section and the technical experts say we're lacking information, then they would get back to us as project management office. We would get back to Alper and tell Alper, hey, Alper, it's a great proposal, but there are some questions from the technical experts. And then there are additional loops, which all take additional time because everyone in the loop usually doesn't reply immediately, but takes at least 1 or 2 days. So to make sure that this goes as fast and smoothly as possible, it's always good to ask someone who has already done it or contact us beforehand if you have any questions. So we're a small, nice team, about your age, actually. So don't worry, just ask us and we can help you as well. So that's it from my side. I would say let's look at Alper's proposal and how he's trying to get resources from ICI.
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much, Anna. So Alper, please feel free to
Thank you.
move forward.
Yeah, before jumping actually to the proposal, I just wanted to give you an overview from my point of view, how I perceived this document basically, and some building blocks, I would say. Just have to share my screen just a second. Here we go. I hope you can see that.
Yes.
Okay, so this is an abstract view on the proposal itself, where I basically, have here three blocks, I would say. And this is then divided into the scientific project, which is of course your project, some work you did before, and the plans you have. So let's shortly focus on the scientific project. Of course, the scientific project, usually it's not just you, there are also collaborators and so on and so forth, or your colleagues. And that's why you may have different tasks in this project. So task A to C I marked here. And even in these tasks, you could, for example, have sub-tasks. And we will see that later on in the document as well. Of course, you have to somehow give the relationship to the HBP of your project. This is a point we can also shortly discuss in a second. Of course, you may have some preliminary work. So maybe this is an extension you'll have, or you already did some things on the supercomputers and some HPC. You may have already used software for your project, which are maybe also in relation with the HBP itself. Lastly, the plans you have, basically. These are plans which goes towards more the resource management. So for example, what kind of software do you want to use? what kind of storage do you need, how much do you need, and of course the important question, how many hours, node hours you need. And we will see that now in the document. I will just bring that here. Okay, I have to zoom a little bit in. Is this visible, Sandra?
Yeah, it looks really good.
Perfect. So this is the template. The template you have to fill in basically, and you can find this on the Phoenix Collab. As I worked with Sandra and two other colleagues, Walter and Christian, we used, of course, a collaboration tool. Kind of obvious, but I recommend that to do that, where you can do that in a collaboration and don't have to pass emails around. The first thing which comes to the eyes, of course, is preamble, where you have to fill in your project name, what type of project that is. For us, it's a new one, the PI, and so on and so forth, the affiliations. Also, what I marked here is the project duration. So what I saw is basically that we started this in April. So it was recently submitted on the 23rd of April. And we had here dates like April to next year, April. So it's important to give a proper date. So Anna, actually, I wanted to ask you, if I give here a wrong date, like I would have given April and I submitted late April, would the coordination team come back to me and tell me, okay, or directly correct this somehow? Is that possible? Or how does this work, for example?
If you would, for example, write, let's say, May this year until May next year, but your project is only approved in June, for example, we would automatically just shift it by 1 month. So we would assume that the project duration is what you're certain about. So if you say 12 months, you need 12 months, and you just get the 12 months from the time it's approved.
Okay, that's
well, the only exception is probably if you reach the end of the current HBP phase. So if a project is scheduled until the end of SJ3, we would let it end at the end of SJ3 no matter what. But apart from that, we just take the duration for granted, not the start date.
Okay, that's
because I mean, setting it back to 2 months ago anyways doesn't make sense. So we just keep the duration the same.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah. Let's move on. Actually, we added here a summary, which is actually optional, but we thought it's nice to have, where we have a short description of our tasks, and then we basically say what is the aim and how, just in a few sentences, this is related to the HBP, because this will come anyway in the next section, which I jumped to. And personally, for me, this section was the most difficult, I would say, because I know in which work package I am, but it was not so easy to write this. So so Sandra knew a lot about this. So basically she wrote what the contributions are and how we support with our tools within the HBP. But maybe Anna, you can comment as well here. How much do I have to write here for the relations with the HBP?
I've looked at a lot of proposals already, and it varies a bit. So I think there should be at least some content. If you're, for example, funded by an HBP task, you should mention that.
Yes.
But there's no need to try to link to each and every single element which you can find in the HBP work plan. So it should be clear if your task, if your project that you would like to do with these resources somehow contributes to HBP, you should describe this so that it's clear for, in particular, the scientific experts, if they are asked for their assessment, that they can say, okay, this fits into this and that work package, and okay, we need this to develop or deploy this or that tool, or for the research in work package 2 or whatever. So it's really for the science experts to understand how this fits into the HBP landscape of tools and research.
Okay.
And I guess if you, maybe I can add, if you are totally external, you can always take a look at the HBP website to see what are the general goals of the HBP. And you can also, the grant agreement is public. So there is a description of what the Human Brain Project is doing, and you can take a look. it is large and but you can also take a look there.
Good. Quite useful. Yeah, so the next section is the preliminary work in case of a project extension. So as I said, this is actually a new project, though we had some experience with other projects or similar projects which are related to these tasks within Jülich and Switzerland, CSCS. And there we had already some computing time which we used. That's why we just put it in here. But in principle, if it's a new one, you can skip this section. We just said what kind of task we did previously and how they are related to this new task, to this new proposal, which actually is then the next scientific methodology or goals and impact. So this is basically our summary. The attentive reader may have seen that. Where we shortly describe what we want to do or what the project itself is about. And then basically we come to the project descriptions and aims, but without any technical detail. So what we say is, okay, we have here 3 tasks. We use these kind of software tools and we want to do this. Separated into 3 tasks. And as I said earlier, we have a bigger task where we then have again subtasks. And this is our like focus task, main task, where we also put some little bit of aim here. So this project aims to investigate and then these 4 points basically. So that it's clear, okay, and that's what we want to do in the end. So we also put a little bit more effort in here because the next point is basically how many resources we would like to consume. So the resources requested. So we have to here explain our request. We have this big table here, and before coming to that numbers here, which we inserted, I wanted to just jump below where we used this table for to calculate our CPU and GPU time, where we basically divided the task in 3 tasks first. So these 3 tasks from up, and yeah, we had also here some subtasks, then we merged them, but we came up in total with the 3 tasks where we put roughly estimations about the node hours per run and the numbers of total run. And then in total, you come to this node hours. And how we in detail come to this number is where we describe the task. So for example, task 1, which is already a preliminary task, these in parts, is here that we described, okay, previously we used 8 cores, 100 individuals and 800. So this is like 800 cores for 3 hours and so on and so forth. And then we want to scale up this to 1,500 iterations and so on and so forth, or task 2 with 400 node hours on the CPUs and so on and so forth. So of course, this is slightly difficult if you don't have HPC resources, but I guess you can also just maybe do it on your local computers, or if you have a local cluster, maybe that's also possible, and then scale up from there. That's always a possibility, what you can do, of course. And then for this bigger task, we again split it up in several subtasks, where we also just said, okay, this will approximately takes 90 seconds, and we need that amount of hours. We have a bachelor student who will work on this, and some analysis we would like to do. So in the end, we come to this total number here, which we then inserted just here. But of course, I guess you don't have to restrict yourself to work on one resources, but you can also use different resources. But that's, I guess, up to the user, right, Anna? You can probably just, or how does this work?
For virtual machines?
So for example, we just requested Yusuf, but could we also request a pit stain, for example?
Yes. We already had a group which said I would like to use, to deploy a service both at Jülich Supercomputing Centre and in Switzerland at CSCS. So they need a virtual machine, for example, at both sites. Mm-hmm. You can request resources at any site that you want in the same proposal. So if, for example, you want to deploy a service and you say, I want to have it run on 2 sites in case that one site is on maintenance, that's possible. So you can, in theory, fill any row in this table, which will be even extended with 2 more sites soon. So you can mix multiple sites in one proposal if there's any reasonable reason why you need more than one site.
Of course, yeah. Makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
A reason is, of course, not all. Some sites don't provide some types of resources. So you can see that in Jülich there is no archival repository available. So long-term storage. If you, for example, need long-term storage as well, you could say, I'm computing on Yusuf in Jülich because that architecture is what I need. But I need to store the data somewhere. So I'm going to ask for long-term storage, so archival storage at CEA in France. That's possible as well.
And I guess it is very important, these footnotes, like take into account the description of the resources when you are planning your technical deployment.
Good. So the next question or section is about if we already used software on a cluster, and which was kind of similar, at least for me, for the task previously, 3.2, where we just again described, okay, we did this on the Yusuf HPC, and described again what we did, with which tools we used, and how many iterations and node hours. Same for the other task as well. That's, I guess, just good to have them again and more, yeah, specific details. Yeah, so then there are a little bit more straightforward things. For example, onboarding, so that you can require onboarding. And in this case, we don't need it because we know how the HPCs work. But it can be useful if you never used HPCs, I guess. So you will get then one technical person who will guide you through that, as far as I understand.
Yes, exactly. This is also particularly useful. So you have seen in previous sections of Alper's proposal that he explains you can't just say, I need this amount of resources, and then you get it, but you have to explain why you need. You explain this number. So how it's, of course, always an estimate. So it's almost impossible to tell exactly how many node hours of storage you will need. It's always some kind of estimation, but you have to explain this estimation, so how you came to this number. But if it's the first time that you use such resources, how would you know that? And in such a case, you can say, it's fine to write that. So you can say, I assume I need about this amount because of this and that reason, but I don't know for sure because it's the first time for me to use such a system. And then you say, yes, I need onboarding. And then during the onboarding, there will be a technical expert helping you to get your software installed, and then look with you at your workflow and see how much you actually need. So in these cases, you typically get an allocation, for example, for first, let's say 3 months, in which you can set up your project and do this onboarding process. And in that time, it will be figured out how much you actually need to maybe even update your proposal with smaller or larger numbers. If your proposal is large. I mean, if you request a small amount anyways, then
that's fine.
It's fine. But this onboarding is really, if you don't have experience with the system and such systems in general, or the specific system, and you say I need some time to get started and some help, then you can say I need onboarding.
Yeah. And also the next section, maybe, Anna, GDPR. So I guess you have to explain. So in our case, we don't, because it's just simulations. But I guess you have to explain also what kind of data or protection you have to use if that's a problem.
So this section is, there are only very few proposals so far which said, yes, our project involves personal data as defined in the GDPR. That is, for example, if you work with patient data and not already super aggregate information, but like individual patients' data. There are a lot of rules to follow, and there is some additional documentation which is needed. So the data protection officers of the applying partner and usually of the center where you would like to get resources will be involved in the process and have to work on some documentation together. which makes sure that everyone is aware of their own responsibilities and where it's clear who's responsible for what. So because it's generally difficult to have personal data on a supercomputer. So it has to be anonymized, for example, and there are a lot of things which need to be clarified beforehand. This is really the flag where you say, okay, this is the case for my project. I am aware that I will work, for example, with patient data. And then the approval process will likely take longer than for normal projects. But it is important to be honest there, because it will, I mean, if a scientist reads the proposal, they will take this anyways.
Yeah, of course.
But this rarely happens. For example, if you do simulations and modeling, it's likely not the case for you.
Right. And then, yeah, one of the next topics discusses a little bit about how you plan and the resource management. We mainly put here the storage, so like input data, how much we will use in total, also like 10 terabytes. We will use the partition from our Simlab already, so we don't require new partitions. But let's say if I would require a data partition, and I know that there's, for example, data partition, Scratch, project, and so on and so forth. So how do I have to indicate that here? So do I have to say I need data partition, I need Scratch and project, or can I just say, okay, I just need this amount of storage? Anna, what would you say?
Yeah, this resource management work plan is the place where you can put any information which doesn't fit anywhere else.
Okay.
So an important topic which will always be asked if you don't write it yourself is what you plan to do with your data.
Mm-hmm.
How much time, I mean, of course you can't say at the order of kilobytes how much storage you will need at any point in time. An important topic there is long-term storage as well. So your proposal didn't ask for any storage resources. You only ask for use of resources. So if you wouldn't write it down here, the technical expert will most likely ask, where are you going to store your data? Where are you going to store it long-term? Is this just a simulation and then you need the, let's say, aggregate information? What do you do with it afterwards? So this is really the place to manage, to mention such details.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you know the partitions, for example, because you know at JSC there is this and that partition, you can write it down. So the storage part is probably a bit more complex because the sites all have different file systems available and call them differently. Some call it work, some call it Scratch. And yeah.
I see. Okay.
But if in doubt, you can just ask.
Sure. Right. And yeah, then some obligatory questions like if we agree with the data management plans and so forth. And there are some footers where you can look into it actually. And the dissemination just tells what we're going to do with the results, like publish them, papers, etc. Make them available, so this code will be available for the community. Yeah, actually, this is coming now to the end. Now, that's the last question, basically. How did you become aware of the HBP resources? Of course, now you can also click here, HBP Tea Slides, hopefully. And with that, I would like to finish also my part and open for questions.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Alper and Anna, for this very nice way to go through the request. We have a set of questions already from the audience, so I'm going to move quickly through them. The first question that we have is, Phoenix resources are only intended to be used for neuroscientific research and not other research?
Short answer, no. Long answer, trying to share my screen again to show you the Phoenix website. So on the Phoenix website, if you click on Access, you will see this page where you have 3 different routes. One is the HBP community, which is how Alper applied. Then there is European neuroscientists via HBP. This basically is exactly the same process. It's just internal and external HBP neuroscientists. But then there is also European neuroscientists via PRAISE. So PRAISE is the Partnership for Advanced Computing in Europe. That's basically the, let's call it, club of European HPC centers. And there is a series of calls for proposals joint calls between PRAISE and ICI, which are open for any European scientists, also outside of neuroscience. So a certain part of the resources of the Phoenix infrastructure are, let's say, reserved for the Human Brain Project, but another part is reserved for PRAISE. So there are already a number of projects that have nothing to do with neuroscience on the systems. It's just that the process works similar to what I described. It's just not organized by the HBP in that case, but by PRAISE.
Okay, thank you so much, Anna, for this answer. I guess that also the HBP covers many things around neuroscience. So also, if you are doing like chip design for neuromorphic hardware, that also applies, even if it's not neuroscience specific.
Of course. So HBP science is not neuroscience, but basically any topic worked on in the Human Brain Project, which could be neuroscience, but also the building of the infrastructure that the HBP builds, so eBrains.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's move to the next question because we have quite many. So how long on average does the acceptance process take from submission until acceptance based on the proposal so far?
It depends, assuming that the proposal is complete. So we don't have a loop where we ask for additional information. It's about, let's say, 4 to 6 weeks if no scientific assessment is required. And I would say 8 to 10 if a scientific assessment is required and the directorate has to make the decision. It's a bit of, there's an element of luck involved. So because the committee, so the IAC, the allocation committee, and the directorate have regular meeting schedules. If you happen to submit a proposal and then the technical assessment is done within a week and the IAC happens to meet the following week, it can be super fast. But of course, it can also be the opposite, that the technical assessment gets available like the day after the last IAC meeting, and then the proposal is on hold for like 4 weeks. So I would say 4 to 6 weeks for small proposals and about 8 to 10 for large ones. And if personal data is involved, it takes as long as the related documentation takes, basically.
Perfect, thank you. And we might add here that you can submit anytime, right?
Yes,
so for the...
you're right. That's important. So it's well, PRAISE has dedicated deadlines, but via the HBP mechanism for HBP people and neuroscientists, there is no deadline. You can apply at any time. And we just process the proposals as they come in.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So the next question is it possible to send your proposal to get feedback if the content is okay before officially submitting it?
Yes. So, I mean, we can't guarantee if we get tons of proposals. At some point, we probably can't do this anymore. But yes, I mean, if you're in particular unsure about a certain section and you're not sure if what you wrote is sufficient, or you're not sure what to write in a certain section, it's better to ask than to spend time on it and then you get the feedback, no, it's not. So worst case is that we say we don't have time. So just try it. I think we will always try to answer such questions on short notice.
And I think that in the case that from the ICBot, it's to BC, you can also try to contact people at the sites to ask for guidance. If specifically if you have questions about like the hardware or a configuration or the existence of a software, I think everybody would be more than happy to respond to your questions.
I think if it's technical questions about the systems or the configuration, because you're figuring out if what you plan to do is possible or not, you can also send them to us and we will just forward them to the experts so that you don't have to search for contact details of the people. Perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anna. The next question is, how long did it take to fill the proposal? I guess this is for you, Alper. The example doc seems relatively long.
Yeah, I think so. Some parts were straightforward. In total, I would say if I calculate everything together, since we did it in a collaborative fashion, maybe a few days, I would say, in total. It depends on how much you already know and planned already. So, for example, the preliminary work I just wrote down. But as I said, I struggled with the relation to the HBP. So it depends, but you can do some parts quite quickly.
What I can maybe add there is if you apply for a very, very small amount of resources, it's also fine to have a relatively short proposal. If you apply for a very large fraction of what is available, you have to justify a bit better how much you need, and that you exactly need this amount and not only 50% of it, for example. So if you only ask for, let's say, a virtual machine and some storage and maybe a bit of computing time, it's perfectly fine to have a short proposal. So what Alper did is this splitting the project into 3 tasks and calculating by task how much computing time is needed is possible, and it makes sense if you have multiple steps that you do, because you have to provide numbers for the steps anyways. But this is it's not mandatory. So this section can also be a lot shorter depending on what you plan to do. If you, for example, say you are processing 1 million images, and per image you need this amount of computing time and this amount of storage, this can be quite short because you're right, I have 1 million images. Per image, I need 10 node hours and 100 megabyte of storage. It's a super fast calculation. So it really depends on your project, how long this has to be.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is actually a very interesting one. I've heard this before a couple of times. Is there a report required after the project expires? And does this depend on the size of the allocation?
Well, not yet. We will ask all projects to write a short dissemination report, which means it should be described how you're going to disseminate the outcomes of what you have done. So we ask you if there are any related publications, conference talks, such things, but not a real report. So no multi-page report. If you apply for the extension of the project, there is this extra section which Alper could have skipped, where you describe preliminary work. And in that section, you have to provide some details of what you've done in the previous allocation phase to basically explain why you need more resources, where you say, okay, I've now processed 1 million images and now I have 1 million more, or I did this type of image processing with them, and now I would like to do that analysis. So it's really describing what you've achieved and why you need more. But there is no like multi-page long report yet, apart from this short dissemination report, which will be 1 to 2 pages and really help HBP and Phoenix to disseminate the results as well.
Okay, perfect. And we go to the last question now. It says, calculation of the estimated required compute time. Even when not sure, should I include some calculations based on my local runs?
I would say that's definitely better than nothing. So if you know, I think image processing is a good example. If you know that, I think you know for sure based on a local run how much storage you need, because you know how large the images will be. And you also know that your local laptop, for example, needs half an hour per image. That's at least an order of magnitude that we can work with. So it's always better to provide such numbers than nothing. And if it's the first time you use such a system, I think it's perfectly fine if you write that down. And you probably in that case anyways want to ask for onboarding. So I would suggest to use these local numbers, include them in the proposal, and then we can see how the runtime on Yusuf, for example, so the HPC system in Jülich would relate to your local time. So because the clock rates of the processors are different, If you use graphics cards, it might be a different one in your computer. So I think it's best to include the local measurements and then compare them in an onboarding period, and then scale the requested resources up or down depending on what you see there.
Yeah, maybe I can just shortly add to that. In one of the tasks, I think it was at the end, so the task 3.3 I showed was an analysis task. So something we didn't do at all before. So basically what I did is a combination of what we had already before. Okay, this we did on a cluster, yes. But the analysis itself, I just did some calculations on my own laptop and then scaled that basically up. So it's, I would say, definitely possible to do something like that as well.
Okay. Well, so we have answered all the questions. I don't see any hands coming up for any additional questions. I would just like to mention that we added some links at the chat related to where you can find, the IC website, the IC Phoenix website, the proposal as an example, and many other things. Oh, there is a question in the chat. It says, are these resources accessible to researchers from Africa, for example?
I need to check. I would suggest that you get in contact with us by email, and then we can check what we can do for you. There are a lot of ifs related. So for example, if you have a project partner in Europe, the situation is maybe different than if you're alone. So it would be great if you could send us an email, and then we can follow up afterwards. I can post our email address again. Okay, perfect. So it was a little bit of a longer session, but I think it was really, really useful for everybody. I am happy to see that there were many questions, and I hope that everybody got a good idea on how to get access to these resources and to boost your research to the new level and do all many nice things that thanks to the IC Phoenix infrastructure together with the eBrains software and research infrastructure within the HBP are becoming possible. So yeah, with this I would then call this session to a closure. Please do not forget that our sessions from Tea Slides are a series, so there will be another session of these Tea and Slides, and the next one will be in June 10th. What we are gonna discuss there, we will have as our host our student representative Alice, who's gonna present or who's gonna be hosting two presenters. I am sorry, I was just gonna get the details, but you can find, oh yes, here. So we have Francesco Jamal and Juan Pablo Romero, who are gonna do we will be touching some details about in silico implementation of research to grasp behavioral tasks, and then more work on real-time brain-inspired control for collaborative robots. So lots of more hardware-oriented and robotics topics on the 10th of June. You're all welcome to join us. And just another thing, there will be a questionnaire coming up after the session. It would be very nice if you could help us filling it up to let us know if you like the session. And thank you very much again for joining us for this. And I hope you had a nice time and you got the information that you needed regarding this. And please keep in touch with us if you have any further questions through Slack, through email, or we have many ways to get in touch. So let's keep working together, networking, collaborating. We're very happy to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Yes, there's another thing. You can always present your work in the next Tea and Slides session. So if you are part of the HBP, you can send your research suggestion to the education program and have your research part of the Tea and Slides. So don't forget, and yeah, thank you all, and see you next time.